Now, the Mexican President, Claudia Sheinbaum, has suggested that her country could retaliate against tariffs proposed by the US President-elect Donald Trump with its own import taxes. Sheinbaum also warned of dire economic consequences for both sides. Trump has threatened to impose 25% import duties on Mexico and on Canada unless they clamp down on migrants and drugs crossing the border. Now, Scheinbaum said Mexico had already done a lot to stem the flow of migrants and that US demand is responsible for the flow of drugs. Mexico and Canada are America's top trading partners. Now, Mexico's president argued that tariffs would hurt both countries and especially US companies based in Mexico.
After one tariff will come another and another until we put our common businesses at risk. For example, Mexico's main exporters to the United States are General Motors, Stellantis and Ford Motor Company, which came to Mexico 80 years ago. Why put a tax on them that puts them at risk? It's not acceptable and would cause inflation and job losses in both the US and Mexico.
For more on this, we can speak to Meredith Crowley, an economics professor from Cambridge University in the UK. Welcome to DW. Thank you so much for joining us. We can hear that Mexico's president is suggesting that Mexico might retaliate against 25% tariffs with tariffs of its own. Can I ask you, what do you think that Trump is trying to achieve with this policy, given that countries are likely to retaliate?
I think he really does want to reduce U.S. foreign dependence or U.S. dependence on foreign imports. The big change we observed when Trump imposed tariffs in 2018 was products taxed basically experienced a 30% decline into the U.S. But for the imports that continued to arrive from China, the price went up by pretty much the full value of the tax, meaning it increased costs for Americans. And we had a big decline of imports from China. However, what's happened since then is supply chains have shifted. So now Mexico has stepped in to fill the gap. And a lot of what is exported from Mexico to the United States is now made using parts that originate in China. So I think at some level with Mexico, Trump hopes to sort of cut U.S. dependence on China. However, as a negotiating strategy, I think it will be pretty much impossible for the Mexicans to make significant inroads on reducing migration and reducing the drug flow. These are already high priorities for the U.S. and Mexico. It's more mysterious what he hopes to achieve with Canada, but it seems that he wants to close U.S. dependence on foreign sources of production.
Yeah. If I can just go back to what you said. So are the tariffs on Mexican products also a way of targeting China?
To some extent, yes, they are. So they will reduce demand in Mexico for Chinese parts going into cars, pieces, other types of manufactured goods, clothing. And so by restricting imports from Mexico, they're having a deeper impact into China. But even with the tariffs that Trump imposed in 2018, China remains the U.S.'s third biggest source of imports after Mexico and Canada. So it's a more significant partner than Germany, than the UK, than Japan. So right now, we are still in the US dependent on China.
Right. Trump has, of course, spoken in the past, hasn't he, about how he wants to attract industry back into the US. As you were saying, the US has had tariffs on imports from China for at least 6 years. So they haven't attracted industry and manufacturing back into the US particularly.
Not hugely, but there has been some growth, both through the Trump tariffs, and then Joe Biden had a lot of extensive industrial subsidies to support electric vehicle manufacturing, a green transition. And those two programs give money to U.S.-based producers, as well as the tariffs have shifted some production into the U.S. The challenge, though, is a lot of that production is highly automated, modern, and efficient. So it doesn't bring a huge number of jobs.
You mentioned Canada earlier. Do you know or can you guess what Trump's strategy is with threatening tariffs on Canadian imports?
That is really surprising to me. I think, if anything, the only thing I can imagine is that he was concerned that Mexican merchandise would go into Canada and then the US would import it in through Canada if he didn't, raise tariffs on Canada at the same time as Mexico. That he was trying to prevent a circumvention. But it's pretty surprising because American firms make profits based on this supply chain that goes through Mexico and into Canada. So this is going to hurt the bottom lines of large American corporations like Ford and like GM, just as the Mexican president just said. And so that will have some negative repercussions on the stock market.
Meredith Crowley from Cambridge University, thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you.